James, what a weekend to lose your phone, buddy.
Oh yeah.
That's crazy.
Right when it happened, I was
We
like,
would have. This is my theory. We would have found out Saturday, but Monty couldn't get a hold of James Ham to tell him. So like, we can't just tell Adrian. Let's keep it moving. I can't find Ham anywhere.
That would be nuts.
yeah, it literally was one of those moments where, I mean, it happened so quickly. My son was backing out a boat, and it was on a rack, like up inside of like a canopy. So he dropped it down into the water, but didn't drop it all the way down. He didn't drop it low enough, so it was still a little too high. And we have umbrellas on the front, so it caught one of the umbrellas and flipped it off and knocked it into the water. So he backed out the boat, and the umbrella's there, and I'm watching it. It's up in the air for a minute, and then all of a sudden it starts to like sink, and I'm like, So I hopped across these wooden planks over to the like on the actual boat lift, and I went and I was trying to grab the umbrella out of the water, and I hear blonk, and I went, oh no. It just all happened so quickly. I did not intend to spend half of my Saturday like in the water trying to like muck, just absolute muck, looking for my phone in the water and never found it. Yeah, it wasn't fun.
And that's why the Sacramento Kings ruined Mother's Day for everybody, is because Sam dropped his phone in the water.
That's funny.
Proper introduction. ESPN 1320 Kings Insider James Ham here with D'Lo and Casey on ESPN 1320 KIFM West Sacramento, KRXQ HD2 Sacramento, an Odyssey station, and driven by last year's Elk Grove Dodge. So it's Mike Brown. How did we get here?
A comprehensive and process-driven approach led us to the right candidate. I mean, I think that at the end of the day...
Right candidate? Do you think he's the right guy for the job?
Yeah, I think he's the right guy for the job. Well, I mean, look, were there other coaches out there that could have probably been the right guy for the job as well? Maybe, but of the original 7, this was probably always the guy that it should have been. And in the end, it's one they landed on, and I think that's a good thing. He's low risk. He is high reward. He's not just a defensive coach. I know he's known as a defensive coach, but, going back and looking, especially on those early Cav years, he posted like the 9th, 18th, 20th, 4th, and 6th highest offensive ratings in the league. So he does have some offensive ability. He did spend the last 6 years learning under Steve Kerr in Golden State. And then he is an absolute gem when it comes to the defensive end. And we've talked about this before, but really when I look at him, you kind of had to go with the defensive coach. I mean, this team has not been in the top 20 in defensive rating since 2005-06. Like, they have been horrible defensively. Mm-hmm. And it is what it is. At some point, it can't just be about getting an offensive guy and hoping that he can hire a defensive coordinator that can help the team out. It has to be a defensive guy who needs an offensive guy to help him. And so that's what I think they did here. And again, I think it's the right move, at least out of the guys that they were looking at. It's a really, really solid hire.
Sorry.
Oh, do we have to take your breaking glass privileges away? What is this?
This is breaking news. Celtics say Robert Williams is out for tonight's game 4. Sorry, Jesse. Left knee soreness. So no Robert Williams tonight for the Celtics.
You are absolutely taking your breaking glass privileges away.
Hey,
you broke glass for Robert Williams?
That's not important. Yeah, we're
Jesse.
Jesse's in the studio banging his head against the console right now. He got the same alert that we did. We talked to Matt Barnes a little bit ago. Matt, of course, played for Mike Brown in that, I guess, transition year in Los Angeles, and had concerns about Mike's ability to kind of lead and really take charge and take the team and pull them up. And, you know, our as we kind of dissected that remark a little bit, I looked at the Lakers being in a totally different position than the Sacramento Kings are. The Lakers of that 2011 year or whatever it was in a very different position than the Kings of, 2022, 2023 are going to be in. And we're going to see Mike work with a team that he's never really had before. Like, he's always had a dominant figure on his team where, LeBron James in 2010 or in 2005 is the best player on that Cleveland Cavaliers roster. That Kobe Bryant is the best player on your Los Angeles Lakers roster. Here, it might be De'Aaron, it might be Domantas Sabonis. No matter which one you decide it is, neither one of them is clear, and neither of them are on the level of the other two guys I just named. So this is a very unique, to his coaching career, this is a very unique experience for Mike Brown.
Well, yeah, and I mean, how old was he when he took over the Cleveland Cavaliers?
I mean, 35.
Yeah, so he was a young man then. I mean, this is a guy that's kind of grown up in the NBA just like players do. And so what we're going to see is probably a completely different iteration of Mike Brown than what we saw before. And I mean, you can have those concerns, but I think those are concerns with everybody when it comes to every coach. And the thing is that, number one, he's done it on really good teams. He inherited a team in Los Angeles that was very, very unique. I mean, they're coming off like a Phil Jackson run. You're talking about, a really seasoned veteran squad. Maybe he wasn't able to capture the imagination of those guys, but at the same time, like, they didn't exactly, perform up to standards either all the time. And so I don't know. I'm willing to give Mike Brown the opportunity to succeed here, and we'll sit down, and I'm sure we're going to have lots of conversations with him over the coming months. We have to wait until he's done with the Warriors. The Kings aren't going to have a press conference until the Warriors season is over, which could come. I mean, that could take a while here. And, look, every coach is different. I mean, you could say the same thing about Luke. You could say the same thing about, Dave Yeager, about any of the coaches the Kings have had. Can they capture the imagination of a room? And this is a younger squad that they're going to hopefully build with. And I'd like to see what he's got.
What's the thing you're most looking to see from what he can do with this team? Is it just defense and how he can possibly change this whole roster's mentality, the whole locker room's mentality, what he does on the defensive end, or is it something else?
No, it's can he capture the imagination of the locker room and you can just put a period on it. Like, that's it. Like, can you capture the imagination? Like, can you be a leader of men? Can you lead these guys into battle? Can this be something you can grow with and they can grow with you? Can you develop a culture here in Sacramento? And we keep talking about that. And as of right now, like, the culture isn't horrible. And it's a bunch of good guys. It's a bunch of very nice guys. But it's a culture that has lost consistently. And you have to worry that you can't change who somebody is after 5 or 6 years of losing and sort of having that beat into you. So what you're hoping is that you can create a culture of winning and really, like, change the way that people are perceived here and the way that this job is perceived. And, whether he's the guy that can do that, we're going to have to give him a couple of years to see. But, plenty of other men have failed in this task. And this is a guy who has experience, who, again, everyone talks about, like, the LeBron James, he coached LeBron James. And it's like, first of all, it was a super young LeBron that he coached the first time around. Secondly, like, the best player LeBron played with in Cleveland for, like, the first couple of years, it was Larry Hughes, who averaged less than 16 points a game. Zydrunas Ilgauskas averaging like 13, 14 points a game. This later on,
there's like an Antoine Jameson run in there somewhere
at the very end,
Williams,
but also Mo Williams. Like, these aren't household names, and they're not household names because they weren't very good once they left there. And Jameson had a solid career, but by the time they got him, he was, I think, 33. Mm-hmm. So, and even then, the highest points per game that he ever played with was Mo Williams at like 17.8 points per game. Mm-hmm. It's not like those were world beater teams. I mean, that when he took the team to the finals in the second season, that team was not good at all. And he had LeBron, but outside of that, like, there wasn't anything else there. And I guess one guy can lead you to the finals. I guess he can't get you over the top, but he definitely is a coach. He's not just a figurehead. He's not just a guy who comes in and looks good for cameras and talks a big game. This guy has gotten dirty and coached. So yeah, I like it.
The thing that concerns me a little, sorry, Dame, the thing that concerns me a little bit about what you just mentioned is when you say the number one thing is being a leader of men and being a culture changer, I wouldn't put that as his first attribute. Can he do it? We'll see. We'll find out. But that number one thing that needs to happen, that wasn't his strong suit. His strong suit was being nice and steady, defensive guy. When you talk about a leader of men between the two candidates, that's Mark Jackson. Changing a culture, that's Mark Jackson. And that's the thing that worries me about Mike Brown is I don't know if he can. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying I don't have the same level of confidence that he can do that because I don't think that's his strong suit. I think his strong suit is to come in, give some stability, and like I said, I'm excited to see what he can do with his team on the defensive end. But if the first thing was the other stuff, I don't think that's a strong suit.
Mark Jackson turned a team around and got to 51 wins in 3 years and got fired because and never got a job again because of the way that he led. And that's it. Like, I mean, we can hash out the Mark Jackson candidacy here, but that had disaster written all over it. I would much rather have a guy who, again, understands a system, understands how to build a culture, who came from Popovich's system, who worked for all kinds of great coaches along the way, who had massive success, who has a 616 career win percentage, who's led almost every team he's ever taken to the playoffs to at least the second round of the playoffs. Like, this isn't some guy that doesn't have a reputation, who doesn't have an ability to lead. I mean, we can wonder if he can be a complete culture changer, but like, the teams he coaches wins. And I get it with Mark Jackson, but the culture that came out of that was toxic. You can think, like, he can stand up in front of a team and preach and do his thing, but it only lasted so long because he ran himself out of the building. And I get it, but that's a guy that, some people liked here, but it's been 8 years and no one else has given him the job. And I mean, just so we're clear here, the Sacramento Kings just didn't give him the job.
Mm-hmm.
But you should say that that's not one of 30. The Sacramento Kings wouldn't give him the job, where, that actually means something in this whole discussion.
And to be honest with you, James, I probably shouldn't even mention Mark because he's irrelevant. My thing with Mike is he's irrelevant to this conversation. My thing with Mike is what you said this team needs is not his strong suit, in my opinion. Like, I don't look at him as this guy that's going to come in and change the culture. We just talked to Matt Barnes. He said that's not really his bag. That's not really what he does. He's a nice guy. He's a good basketball mind. He's not a culture changer. And that's what kind of concerns me about this thing. If you're saying that's what the team's number one priority would be, it don't really line up right now.
I would say you don't stumble into a 616 win percentage. You have to be able to lead. You have to be able to have a personality. You have to be able to direct traffic, to have, we all know he's a defensive guy, but in order to teach defensive principles to NBA players or to, 9-year-olds, you have to be able to demand something from somebody, because that's all about effort. That's all. That takes leadership in itself. Like, rolling a ball out there and having guys score 140 points. Mike D'Antoni's brilliant, but there are coaches all over the place that can score. They can get a team to score. Getting a team to play defense, that's where leadership comes in. Everywhere he goes, they improve defensively. That tells me that he can lead, and he can make guys do something that is uncomfortable for them, which is play defense. because all of these guys are the best players on every team they ever played on, and very few of them ever played defense before they got to the league, and all of a sudden they've got to learn, and he's been able to do that. So, I don't know. I'm confused. Like, again, if I looked at that list, and I'll look at it all the time, but he was the guy from the beginning. And I don't know if there's, a lot of people say, oh, why isn't Terry Stotts on this list? Well, Terry Stotts never got a team to play strong defense. He had strong defensive players, but he never got a team to play defense to buy in. And that's what it comes down to. If you're going to be a guy who your entire career is set on defense, that means that you're a leader who gets people to buy into what you're doing, because nobody in the league wants to play defense.
So what's next?
Next, we just shift into neutral and we wait for Mike Brown to slowly do his coaching hires, which I don't think they might wait all the way till the end. But at the same time, I think that he really does want to finish his thing out strong with the Warriors. He wants to put, the Kings' job, like compartmentalize it to the side and say, okay, that's waiting for me, but I got to get through this, and we're going to try to win a championship here. And so we're going to have to wait. We might know something about some of the assistants relatively soon, but as
Kenny
of right
and I were
now,
talking about that earlier. Do you think he already, like, I bet Kenny's money.
Money.
You
can bet his money.
I feel more comfortable betting your money. Mike already has his first assistant, like his lead assistant. He probably already knows exactly who that is and has a good idea of how he's going to fill out this roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got some ideas. I think even in the interview process, you ask, like, what are you looking for? But, will Steve Kerr let one or two of his guys go? Will a guy like, Chris DeMarco come along with him, who almost took a job as an assistant in Sacramento a couple of years ago, and I thought was getting a job here in Sacramento, and then at the last second it didn't work out. Does he have someone else in mind? Can you go back to his old staffs and find somebody that he spent a ton of time with and feels super comfortable with? I think. What's that?
Darvin Ham.
Yeah.
Darvin Ham, one of his staffs?
Well, I think he was on a staff. Maybe he was on the Lakers staff. Yeah, but I don't think long term. And Darvin Ham is a guy that he helped discover, as a player and stuff like that. So I think that what we're going to get from Mike Brown here is a coach who's learned who and what he is and what he needs to supplement what he brings to the table. And so I think we're going to get some strong coaching hires here to go around him, and really kind of, like, if there are any holes in his game, they'll catch him. And that can be, someone he's comfortable with. It can be, some up and comers that he knows of or someone knows of. But I expect him to have a pretty solid staff here in Sacramento.
Do you think this process went too fast, too slow, or just right?
I think it went just right. I think when it came down to it, like the last couple of days, I mean, I wish they didn't have to do it on Mother's Day. But just looking at the Warriors' schedule, it really was the only day. Like, either you got it done on Friday, which, they were still doing, like, sort of the interview process, like cleaning up the interview process. Once you got to Saturday and you knew that, like, there was going to be that weirdness that, Vivek was going to the Warriors game, but also Mike Brown was coaching in the Warriors game and Mark Jackson was calling the Warriors game. That had, like, a recipe for disaster. You couldn't make an announcement for that. And then you got to Sunday, and I think, the Kings, they waited as long as they could to let people have a good Mother's Day. And then they're like, okay, we got to do this because he's got, on Monday, the Warriors, of course, have a game. And you don't want to be a distraction from him and what he's trying to accomplish there with Golden State. So I think a 2-week process is good. I think you got in, you got your interviews done, you had your finalists locked up before anyone else even really hit the ground running and started to do a bunch of interviews. And that means that you kind of had a placeholder. Mark Jackson did interview with the Lakers, but at the same time, they were kind of focused. He was focused here first, and then if it wasn't this job, if he got two job offers, and he would have to sit there and mull them both over. And so, yeah, I think the actual process itself, 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks, 2 days over 2 weeks, that's actually really good and probably about as thorough as you need it to be.
What do you think swayed them towards Mike? Not just over Mark Jackson and Steve Clifford, the forgotten candidate here on the final list, but also over, guys like Mike D'Antoni, Darvin Ham, Charles Lee, those guys who were on the Will Hardy, the guys who were on the initial list.
Yeah, I know very specifically the reason why Mike D'Antoni wasn't considered was because of the defensive side of the ball, that they knew how good he was offensively. Monty McNair is extremely comfortable with Mike D'Antoni. They spent a lot of time together in Houston. But at the end of the day, you got to look at all of the pieces that go into that. D'Antoni is, I think he did turn 71, or he'll be 71 like any day at this point. On top of that, I think he's just known as an offensive guru. And on the defensive end, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's kind of the way he's been. And they wanted to focus on defense. And then, again, with the other guys, I think the experience of being a winner, of having the ups and downs, of, coaching an 82-game season for, 7 years. 1 year he had the 5-game weirdness in LA. But you want someone that understands how difficult it is, how much this takes out of you. And I understand that too, how difficult it is in Sacramento, because every time that this thing hits like a 4-game losing streak, you have this, oh no, here we go again mentality. And you got to be able to bring your guys through that and get them over the hump. And when it hits 7 games, when it hits 8 games, you got to be able to pull back and ride out the storm. And the Kings aren't good at that, but they are good at getting themselves into those situations. And so at the end of the day, the experience factor is huge. And that's why I think they didn't go with one of the inexperienced coaches, just because, when this thing does lose itself a little bit through an 82-game schedule, and it always does, especially in Sacramento, you got to have somebody who has a strong enough base to get you through. And I think that's why they believe that, Mike Brown is one of those guys in this list that has been there, but also has shown an ability to avoid some of those problems and to get teams through an 82-game season without faltering.
We just talked to Jason Lloyd from The Athletic, covered Mark Brown. See, I almost did it again. One of these days, I'm just going to say Mike Brown consistently without any kind of issue. But he covered Mike Brown in Cleveland for a number of years. And he spoke about how he was surprised that Mike took this job because it is such a tough undertaking to take over this franchise right now, especially when he said Mike had other offers, throughout the years and would probably get one another time. Are you surprised that Mike Brown actually wanted this Kings job?
Yeah, I told you guys in the beginning, he's the one guy on the list that I didn't know if he would take the job. That was a legitimate concern. He's in a really, really good position. I mean, at the end of the day, he's won, I think he's already got 3 championship rings as an assistant. That's a lot of fun. I've been to all of the, the Western Conference Finals, the NBA Finals with, covering a team. When you're winning and you're cruising through those things and you're coming home with a ring, that's incredibly exhilarating and it's rewarding. And, that's why he's been there for 6 years. So, yeah, I think getting him out of Golden State and again, earlier when I mentioned, this is a Kings job. This is a franchise that hasn't won in 16 years. This is a hard sell. It's a hard sell for free agents. You got to make perfect trades. You've got to draft extremely well. And then you got to hope that everything works out. And 9 times out of 10, the Kings fail at least on one of those fronts. And so you got to figure out a way to, if you're going to come here and you're going to sign a 4-year deal, you got to figure out a way to be the guy that kind of figures it all out and puts it together. And if you do, you'll be revered. And that's what we saw with Rick Adelman. But outside of that, this job is it's eating people alive. And so someone has to be the right guy to step up and take over a team that has some major question marks. You hope that they keep building the roster. You hope that they fix a lot of the holes. But at the end of the day, you also hope that you have a coach that can establish a culture and a mindset. What is Kings basketball? It's something that I've heard from Doug Christie for so long. What is Kings basketball? And if you can tell me any year outside of the 1 year where Dave Yeager just had them running and Kings basketball was, we're going to run you off the court, that's the only time in the last 16 years that they've had any kind of identity. So you need someone who can build an identity, whatever that identity is. You need it, and that's probably the most important thing. That's what I mean by you need a leader of men, a guy who can set the table, but really you get the buy-in and you develop who and what the team is. And again, I think of the list of 7, Brown is the surest bet to be able to create that.
I want to ask you, I'm glad you brought up Doug Christie. I want to ask you about him when we return. I want to ask you some questions about this roster as well. Plenty more ahead with 1320 Kings insider James Ham here on Sacramento's #1 sports station, ESPN 1320. We're clear. I'm going to run downstairs for a second, guys.
Yeah, man.
Sorry if I snapped at you there.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I didn't take it that way at all.
Yeah. No, I mean, I get it. There, and Matt Barnes can have his opinion all he wants. I totally get it. He's been in those locker rooms. But this is not that team. I mean, that team had huge personalities everywhere. And part of, who Mike Brown is that he can get different types of personalities to buy into who and what he is and what he's trying to accomplish. So, there are many ways to skin a cat as a manager of people.
Absolutely. I think he's a good basketball mind. Like I said, I'd be lying if I didn't say I'm wondering if he's like a leader of men in that respect. I mean, and Matt said what I was thinking. There's some guys who were assistant coaches. You know what I mean? And I don't know if Mike is just an assistant coach or is he a guy that could take a team to the next level. Obviously, right now, I hope he's goddamn John Wooden. Phil Jackson. You know what I'm saying? Hell, he ain't even got to be that. Be Ty Lue or something like that. Get these guys to the postseason. So I hope he's all that, and he deserves the opportunity to find out, what type of coach he is. But I mean, those are my concerns about him going into this process as well.
That team he took to the NBA Finals, holy cow, that team is bad. I mean,
yeah.
Like, here we go. Shannon Brown, Boobie Gibson, Drew Gooden, Larry Hughes, Zydrunas Ilgauskas, LeBron James, Damon Jones, Dwayne Jones, Danielle Marshall, Ira Newbill, Sasha Pavlovich, Scott Pollard, which I think Pollard was hurt most of that season, Eric Snow, Anderson Varejao, and David Wesley. David Wesley was in year 13. Danielle Marshall was in year 12. I'm
trying to think of what happened that year. And this isn't to knock Mike Brown. I'm just looking at the league. The East was so garbage at that time. I don't know how Detroit let that happen, where they lost to that Cleveland team.
Yeah.
It's pretty embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, they beat the Wizards. They beat the Nets in round 2. They beat the Pistons.
I remember that. So didn't they sweep the Nets?
No, they swept the first round series 4-0, second round 4-2, 4-2 in the third round.
Yeah.
And then they lost 4-0 to Duncan and Parker and Ginobili. But again, on that team, Larry Hughes averaged 14.9 points. Drew Gooden averaged 11. Ilgauskas averaged 11.9. And then after that, it's like a steep drop off. Pavlovich averaged 9, but like no one could score. Like, and even LeBron only averaged 27.3, playing 41 minutes a night. 41 minutes as a 22-year-old. I mean, like that takes some coaching. It really does. So, you know, guys, yeah, like I've never once looked at one of these rosters that he had in Cleveland and thought, oh my goodness, you know, outside of LeBron James, it really is a whole bunch of like nobodies.
Yeah. I will say this though. You better win here. Better get this right.
Right? Hang on, Casey. Live on the Odyssey app, live on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook Live as well. For those on ESPN 1320 and the Odyssey app, you're worried about Kings coverage running out at 4 o'clock. No worries. Stay put. We'll run some things back for you from 4 to 6 leading into the Warriors and the Grizzlies tonight. So you have to go nowhere to get your Sacramento Kings coverage here on Sacramento's #1 sports station, ESPN at 1320. As we were coming back from that break, Kenny was in the midst of telling 1320 Kings insider James Ham, Mike better win.
Facts.
Pick it up from there.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. And all this stuff that we talk about, what he did in Cleveland and what he did, that's all fine and well. He better find a way to get it done in Sacramento. For me personally, ain't no buffer. Ain't no, well, I got to give him time. First of all, the general manager's going on his 3rd year. If he doesn't have a roster good enough to make the playoffs at this point, that's a major concern. Second of all, this is what you got into. Ain't nobody, will give him some time. Yeah, I'll give him some time the first week of the season. I better see like a 500 team or a team above 500 at that point, because it's time to win now. And I want to ask you, James.
Things are 2-2. Kenny's like, we got it. First week of the season.
Stay here the whole time. Stay 500. You'll be good. You'll get where you need to go. But I want to ask you, James, do you think that's the same message within the front office walls of the Sacramento Kings? The time is now. Like, win now. Not to say win now or you'll be fired, but win now.
Yeah. I mean, that's where we're at, right? This team, I mean, you just set the record for the longest playoff drought in NBA history with 16 years. If I'm looking at like sort of I'm going to give, I hate doing this, but I'm going to give Monty McNair a little bit of a break for year one, because you have to remember how that whole thing played out. Like, we were in shutdown, then the bubble happened, then Vlade got fired. They didn't even hire him until September 17th. The draft, free agency, all happened within like a 3-day window. Like, everything was chaotic. The fact that he came away with Glenn Robinson III and Hassan Whiteside as his only 2 free agent pickups, I thought was alarming. And I looked at that roster and I thought that roster was horrible. But here we are. Like, I think the way that he set everything up is, you now know that you have 2-star level players, all-star level players, whatever you want to call them. And Fox, you know, maybe he falls short of that. Maybe he never makes an all-star team. We don't know. But at this point, you have 2 guys that you think can average basically close to 50 points per game combined. 50 points, like 17 rebounds, probably looking at like 15 assists between those 2 guys, like in a normal season when they're playing together. So now Monty has to, on the fly, put this thing together. And he still has the flexibility to go out and take another swing. He still has all of his draft picks. He has a bunch of second-round picks. He's got, like we talked about, $40 million in expiring contracts. This is a moment where, kind of like the Rick Adelman moment, right? If you hit it right and you bring all these pieces in at the same time, you can kind of look at the Sabonis edition as, like when the Kings traded for Weber. And you're going to need a couple of big free agents. You're going to need a draft pick or 2 to really turn out well. But if you can piece it all together, and you got to remember that one offseason, they signed Vlade, they traded for Chris, They still had Corliss Williamson, but Peja Stojakovic came after sitting out playing in Europe for 2 years. Jason Williams was their draft pick. They signed some other guys that made sense. Scott Pollard became available like during that season, where I think was it Atlanta or Detroit waived him out of nowhere. Like everything came together at one point, and I kind of look at this offseason that if you can hit it right and you can start stacking good days of additions, whether it's through the draft or through free agency, through trades, you can actually make some major headway here. I think the roster isn't great, but I also think that it's not as bad as it played this year. And I also think, having guys like Terrence Davis back, if you're bringing Dante DiVincenzo back for a full season, like all of a sudden you start piecing together things that make some sense. So you need length, you need defenders, you need all that stuff, you need shooting. But at the same time, the base is here, and you hope that Monty has set everything up so it's not just this offseason, but it's next offseason when they have a ton of cap space, that this is that moment where they're starting to build something. Maybe they sneak into a plan. Maybe they sneak into a back end of the playoff type scenario. And then, who knows what happens.
I don't expect you to know the answer to this, James, but I'm going to ask anyways. Any idea what Doug Christie's future is?
No, I mean, as of right now, no coach has been told anything. They don't know what their future is at all.
So that's good. The coaches weren't fired on Mother's Day. So that's at least
no.
That right.
Or today, happy birthday to my friend Doug Christie. It's his birthday, so hopefully they don't do something like that.
No, I got it real quick.
Yeah. So like he has not been told. None of the assistants have been told what their future is. Just like what you heard from Josh Lloyd, right? With Jason Lloyd, sorry.
Jason Lloyd, yeah.
When it comes to Mike Longobardi, like they don't know, and we're gonna see this thing kind of figure itself out pretty quickly. And those, just so you know, those Cleveland guys, those beat writers there, those are the party crowd of the NBA. They're a fun group. Jason Lloyd and they've got a couple of them there. Like they're always a good time when they used to visit, especially when they're out for long stretches like playoff series and stuff. That's a good group of guys. But yeah, I hope that Doug makes a staff, and I'm sure. Well, I know he hopes that he's around. They put a lot of eggs in this basket, and they're hoping that this is still a long-term fit for him.
James, we talked about it earlier. They said I was defending the man to no end. They said I was trying to get his courtside seats. I'm just trying to ask the question. Are we still... Are we going to continue to have this narrative that Vivek needs to stop meddling and let basketball people do what they do, when yet another time he let the basketball people do what they do and he lost another battle? Like we said earlier in the show, if he's a meddler, he's probably the worst of all time because he never wins these battles, ever. Are we done with this?
Well, I think this is a good moment. Like I do. I think it's a good moment. Now you need to make sure that your general manager is locked up and has the same contract as the head coach. I mean, that's the next thing that has to be addressed here in the coming weeks and days. So I think that that's a concern still. But at the same time, like, look, it's always been about this. It's not that he can't be there. It's not that he can't be an owner, that he can't be standing on the sidelines cheering and everything else. It's just very specific. He needs to let, like, decision making at the end of the day, we shouldn't have to know every single time who he wants. And I know some of that is by design. It's by agents who like put it out there. They know that there's an internal struggle. They have a discussion with somebody who tells them that it's an internal struggle. And so they play to that. They play it up so it becomes a big issue that that maybe is bigger than it really is. But at the end of the day, like if this is who Monty wanted, it's the right move. Like if this is who he thinks he can work with and everything else. And so, yeah, I hope that we're learning from these things because you can avoid that by not letting your opinion on all of these things be known. So even if you have an
He's the
opinion
owner of the team. He's allowed to let it. I don't think Vivek is calling Mark Stein saying, "Hey, I really like this Mark Jackson guy." Like Vivek is allowed to share his, like it's his freaking team.
I don't even think he's telling the snitch. Whoever snitched, I don't even think he's telling him.
Well, no, but if the situation is that you want to avoid this being part of the discussion every time, then you got to handle your business slightly differently. You know what I mean? Because that information gets out too easy. You need to tighten it up a little bit because it should not always be this. It should not always be Vivek versus the front office. Like the less we hear about this stuff, the better.
Vivek versus the front office. No matter the front office, it is Vivek versus the front office.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I don't know, man. Let's stop talking about the owner forever and let's talk about the roster. We know that Monty McNair tends to work pretty closely with coaches. At least we learned that was the case with him in Houston. He would work with Mike D'Antoni and filling out this roster for his style. And I assume, and it's clear, Monty has a commitment to defense. You could tell that with Dante DiVincenzo and Davion Mitchell. And, now with the hiring of Mike Brown. I'll ask you a question I asked Kenny earlier. Dante's, he's got to be a priority now. Whatever the beef is with Dante's people and the basketball people of the Sacramento Kings, we've got to get that squared away because Dante seems like a Mike Brown guy. Even the Pug thinks Mike Brown is a guy that Dante's a Mike Brown guy. That's why he's running around in there.
That's the corgi. She's
that's the corgi.
Like, she's causing trouble. The Pug is hiding out upstairs.
He had a long face is hilarious. Like, hey,
he had a long day at the vet. No, I'm just watching to see what's next because she's having a moment. Yeah, and now the wife is coming down to scoop her up and
the corgi's the puppy.
That's the baby. Yeah,
that's the puppy. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
still runs the house.
She does. Yeah, we've never had a girl dog here at the house, and this is a different experience. Yeah. Yeah. What was your question?
DiVincenzo.
Yeah,
he's got to be a bigger. I would think he's a. I mean, I think he was a big priority to begin with, but he seems like a Mike Brown. He seems like a perfect fit for the way Mike Brown coaches.
No, I agree. I totally agree. He's got all kinds of skill. He plays defense. He plays hard. This is a guy he's a winner that easily will buy in. He'll buy into what you're selling because that's who he is as a player. And he's a team guy and all that stuff. So, yeah, I really do think that he's a guy that you probably do focus on a little bit more now. But then again, if there are options out there that somehow present themselves that are better at the shooting guard position, the Kings are going to be open to everything. And you brought up Monty McNair, like being the guy who talks, who has a working relationship with coaches. That really was his job in Houston. I mean, he is the analytics guy that would break down how the analytics works with the coaching staff. Like this is all we're trying to do. We're not telling you to reinvent the wheel. We're just telling you that if, player X shoots 32% from the field and this spot on the floor and 48% on this spot on the floor. So get him to that spot. Let us show you that these are where the hot spots are, stuff like that, that these certain players fade after this amount of time on the court in one stretch. So let's go with a different rotation and stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that McNair is a guy who can have a relationship with these guys very quickly. Mike Brown is a guy he feels comfortable with. But then when it comes to DiVincenzo, that's going to be a team decision. It's going to be, is McNair comfortable with moving forward with him? Is the money going to be right? Is there someone that they feel is better that maybe, shoots the ball more consistently from three, whatever it might be. Still, at the end of the day, you are onto something. This is kind of a guy that you could see them building around in a Mike Brown type situation.
Would the same possibly be said about Davion Mitchell? That seems like another guy who's would fit what Mike Brown is trying to establish here, or what we think he'll be trying to establish here in Sacramento. So Davion, I would think, would possibly be a big part of that.
Yeah, I mean, here's how I would look at it. Everyone has to be better defensively. And if you're going to play for Mike, you have to buy in defensively. And that means that even if De'Aaron Fox isn't known as a great defender, he has to get better and he has to buy in and he has to do what they're asking. Because if not, you start looking at guys in a different way and saying, okay, maybe we've tried this thing too many times and we need to go a different direction. Like if someone won't buy in, if there is like the odd man out who said, well, I don't really play defense. I remember famously that Nate McMillan was told by Jamal Crawford, yeah, I don't really do that. I don't really play defense. They're like, hey, I need you to get back. He's like, yeah, that's not really who I am. Like, but you can't have a guy like De'Aaron Fox be that way. He needs to buy in, and he needs to work on his defensive principles. He needs to start seeing the game plan. They need to put players around him that will support him better. He needs long wings. He needs a shot blocker. He needs active defenders and 3-point shooters. Like this thing all has to come together in a specific way if it's going to work.
Is De'Aaron's growth on the defensive end more important than his consistency on the offensive end this upcoming season?
No, I think both of them are hugely important. You need him to be the player that we saw like near the end of the season that was just lighting everybody up, averaging 28, 29 a game.
You think that's who he is?
Yeah. I mean, the more I've seen him do that, the more I think that's who he is. And you need him to be that guy, and you need him to be better on the defensive end, if that makes sense. Like I was watching Donovan.
You need both. Like, I get it.
Yeah, I was watching Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs, and Donovan, came into the league as a great defender, and now he's known as a great offensive player. And we kept talking, like everyone's talking about, just the blow-bys. Like, he just didn't play defense hard. Like, I don't know what it was. He got beat off the dribble way too often for a guy who's known as a good defender and who does his thing. So you almost wonder if there was too much emphasis on one side or the other. But I think for this team to be a playoff team, Fox has to improve defensively. He's got to keep men in front of him. It just can't be like a wide open run to the basket all the time. But you also need him to be a major league table setter, and he needs to figure it out. How can he be impactful on both ends of the court?
I'm trying to make sure I got this phrased correctly, Damian. Help me out here. But he asked me a question earlier where he said, can Mike Brown be successful, the Kings be successful, and Domantas Sabonis ends up being the best player? And that was asked because I thought the biggest thing for Mike Brown was to make sure he got the absolute most out of De'Aaron Fox. And Damian asked me the question, and I was kind of stumped. Well, what if he didn't get the most out of De'Aaron Fox, but he got the most out of Sabonis? Do you think that will lead to King's success? I think ultimately I said, yeah, but I don't know. It can't be like 19 points a game, Fox, I don't think. Or like Sabonis would have to be the one going like 25 and 13 or something like that. What do you think? Can Domantas Sabonis be the one that Mike Brown gets the most out of, and the Kings still take a jump?
Well, here's the problem I see. Okay, so we talk about the Kings don't have LeBron James, right? Like, we all know that. But LeBron James is like the Atlas man, right? The guy holding up the globe on his shoulders. He is a pillar, a one-man pillar, or at least he was through probably, I don't know, 16 of his seasons. I think at this point, he really can't do it all on his own. He can put up the stats, but he can't do it all on his own, which is why the Lakers didn't make the playoffs. The Kings don't have the one pillar. So for this thing to work, it's got to be a two-pillar. You have to have two guys shoulder the burden equally. And you probably need 3 or 4 to shoulder all of it, but some of those guys can be secondary supports, right? It really does have to be a strong base built around at least 2 players, and then you hope that you can put other pieces around them that makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I don't know that there's this thing won't survive if it's just one of them holding it up. I don't think. And Sabonis to me is spectacular. I love watching him play. I love his style of play. He's really better at 18 points a game than he is at trying to get up to 22. He really is. He's better as a strong offensive player that averages 12.5 rebounds a game, but that gets you 6 to 8 assists a game. That's where his sweet spot is. It's not 20, 24, 12, and 3. It's more like that 18, 19, 12, 13, and 6 to 8. And I think that's where his sweet spot is. So yeah, there's a lot that has to happen still for this team to be good. I'm not just going to say no coach can just walk in here and make this thing just spectacular by snapping his fingers. It's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of focus on the defensive end and adding a lot of pieces to make this thing better. But I think that you have some good building blocks.
Got the right guy.
I think they got the right guy. Yeah.
Me too. Kenny doesn't. I don't think Matt Barnes does either.
I said to be determined because they ain't the right guy until we talking about round 1 somewhere. That's the right guy.
Well, I think that's what we're talking about is, can this guy get you to round 1? And that's my point, is I think Mike can.
Yeah, he can. Absolutely. I agree with that.
Now we can go back to stressing over lottery balls and trying to figure out how to acquire Cam Reddish for Kenny. So,
or Duncan Robinson. Don't forget Duncan.
Yeah,
that one first too. One day you guys are gonna start listening to me, man.
I can't wait for Kenny's next epiphany. We need a Steph Curry here. I can't wait for that.
We need a Steph Curry here. That's a fact.
If this team had, they only had Kevin Durant.
Listening to me, man. I told y'all what we needed. I gave you Duncan Robinson. I gave you Kyle Kuzma last year. One day y'all gonna.
Okay, no, don't get all sensitive. It started with you saying we need Dame Lillard. Knock it off. Everybody remembers the original epiphany was Sacramento needs Dame Lillard. James, tremendous stuff.